Wonderful. All right. Hello, everyone. I'll be giving a short presentation today and then hopefully followed by a discussion based on some of the points that I want to highlight. I'm talking about the Turing Way, which at its heart is a collaborative guide to data science and research. So a little bit about me. I currently work at the Alan Turing Institute and I'm a core contributor to the Turing Way. At the Alan Turing Institute, I work on the AI for multiple long-term conditions research project within health and medicine, and I am also a research associate, and I lead on the citizen science and open science and participatory research projects across the Tools, Practices and Systems program at Turing. So what we'll be going through today, just to signpost it, is I'll present what is the Turing Way, give a little bit of an overview as to why it's useful. I want to flag and highlight some of the guides inside the Turing Way, which I'll explain what those are, and the resources that you might find useful. And then where I'm hoping to launch a discussion out of is kind of the culture shift that we talk about when we talk about the Turing Way and how we can use these kind of collaborative pieces of work to start moving the big machine that is academia towards a collaborative culture. So collaboration for culture change. So let's dive in to what is the Turing Way. So before I kind of launch into the Turing Way, I need to tell you a bit behind the project. So the Turing Way is supported and housed within the Alan Turing Institute. The Alan Turing Institute was established in 2015, so it's still relatively new, as the UK's National Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. The kind of focuses that the Turing Institute has, and I know that Leeds is a partner university of Turing, is to really advance world-class research to highlight the work going on within institutes such as Leeds, and apply the research to real-world problems, whether that be an open source system for air traffic control and flight planning, where hold training and workshops to help train leaders of the future, including all the PhD students and my old cohort, and also to lead the public conversation on AI implementation in a way that is ethical and sustainable. So within that, the Turing Way supports this essentially guide to data science. It is an open source guide, and I'll explain a little bit about the implementation of that shortly. At its heart, it is a book or a book of books. It's a guide that is supported by and involves a global community of diverse researchers, academics, and people out in industry who want to make data science reproducible, ethical, collaborative, and inclusive for everyone. It's all built using open source tools, because ultimately what we are trying to do is supporting a culture of collaboration away from the academic silos that so many of us are used to, towards working together to produce something greater than the sum of its parts. There we go. Well, so how it started, it is still a relatively new project. It's been going for about 4 years. It first started by Kirsty Whitaker, who is the program director for Tools, Practices and Systems, back when she was at Cambridge. And she imagined what would a living guide, a kind of a work in progress living document for reproducible data science and AI look like. The book initially launched with kind of 10 members at Turing and 3 chapters, all focused about computationally reproducible environments and also the kind of project design. Before that, by the end of 2019, there were 67 contributors. Then in 2020, it sort of expanded as so many people were joining in on the community. So it split from 1 book into 5 guides, which included a community handbook. We started launching on social media and Twitter. Several translation teams started to translate it into different languages, and we finished out the year with 238 contributors. Since then, the project has grown massively, and we continue to build out. So there are now 250 live chapters. So with over the past kind of 3+ years, It's evolved and each of the guides has well over 300 pages, full of community resources, hosting events, workshops on individual sections of the Turing Way, introductions to GitHub. The book is now guidance on many different things. It has templates and guides to training, which we're really excited about. There are over 350 direct GitHub contributors and thousands of users, which has been so fantastically exciting, with just under 1,000 stars on the GitHub repository that houses this online resource called the Turing Way, which is super, super exciting that so many people are now using it. And kind of beyond the scope of the project, it's been really cool in the last kind of year, including this year, to see how this resource has been used by students, which is kind of what I was, teachers, educators, professors, other community builders such as the Software Sustainability Institute, and we've got some policy makers, including the Mayor of London, using some of the Turing Way guidance to implement into policy on open source and open infrastructure work. We got a commendable mention. We're a highly commendable project by the Hidden Ref this year, and we've now been cited in well over 10 peer-reviewed publications, as well as the Gold Acre Review, which gave an overview of the state of health and medical research in the UK. So that's all kind of what is the Turing Way as a concept. But beyond the concept, why is it useful? Why would someone go to the Turing Way? So I'm talking to all here at Reproducibility Leeds. So we're all involved in research quite frequently, so we're familiar with the research cycle. We'll come up with a research idea either from reading the literature or, you know, having a brilliant cup of coffee. So from that idea, you'll then start to work with collaborators, supervisors, others in your department, colleagues, to think of a plan for how to collect data, test that hypothesis, follow the scientific method. You'll then go out. If you're in ornithology, you might go out with a butterfly catcher. If you're in psychology, you might just go put flyers up and recruit participants. And you'll go collect your data. You'll start to clean it, organise it, before you then analyse it. And then after analysis, you might do a write-up, you might go through a publication process, you might go to a conference or host a workshop. And then if you are doing things kind of in this focus on sustainability of research, hopefully then you'll document it, pack it up so that it can be further reused in future studies. But that's not always the way that we have done things. And so we have frameworks such as the FAIR framework. So ensuring that data and documentation around that data is findable, accessible, interoperable, so that other disciplines and it can be used in other research studies, and then also reusable or reproducible. And how this connects to the Turing Way is that at the Turing Way, you want to take frameworks that exist. The idea is not to reinvent the wheel, but to take what exists and make it so that reproducibility is too easy not to do using these frameworks, and move towards a culture where we can address the reproducibility crisis. So you use that word a lot throughout this presentation. And again, this was the kind of tweet out. But what is reproducibility? So the Turing Way kind of came up with this little matrix to differentiate reproducible from other terms such as generalizable or replicable. Replication. I'll go with that word. So the idea is that if you have the same data and you perform the same analysis on that same data and you get the same result, then that result could be said to be reproducible. If you have different data, but you performed the same analysis and you get the same result, that, you know, data might be, or that result will be replicable. It can be replicated across different sets. And so if we have the Youth and Ulrich or the URIC data set, and then we have a Bourne and Bradford data set, which are two different data sets, we perform the same analysis, get the same result, we could say that those results were able to be replicated. Then if you have a different analysis, if you have a different data set, you perform a different analysis, but you get the same result, those results are generalizable. But what does this kind of mean to the research cycle? So when we are striving towards reproducibility or even replication, it really needs to be intentional from the start, from the actual idea that you have, the study design, how you collect your data, how you document and process your data, all the way through to the dissemination, the publication. When we're thinking about reproducibility, we need to be intentional at each stage of that design process through research, and there are tools such as pre-registration that are really starting to address this in a meaningful way, which are fantastic. So how does the Turing Way help with this? So as I mentioned, the Turing Way initially started as a guide for reproducibility, or a guide for reproducible research focused just on AI and data science, but has expanded significantly to include neuroscience, bioinformatics, and really any type of research that includes statistical methods or statistical analyses. So this initial guide helps give an overview of what is reproducible research, how does reproducible research relate and connect to this idea of open research. We can talk about tests that you can do, and within this guide for reproducible research, there are these chapters that then have, again, hundreds and hundreds of pages of content that's been generated from our community that can be accessed by anyone at any point in time and improved at anyone at any point in time. As you can imagine, this is not a book that is to be read similar to a textbook. It is to be used almost like a reference. So you're meant to read it out of order. You're meant to find something in it, use it essentially as a search engine for how to help improve your research through the process. But again, it's beyond just reproducibility. So we now currently have 6 books. We're looking at a 7th, which we call the Turing Way guides. So there's the guide to product design, to project design, a guide to communication, which built out extensively as we adapted to virtual events and hosting hybrid or entirely virtual and remote collaborations. We then have the guide to collaborating as within our research kind of training, whether you consider PhD students or postdocs or whatever it is, trainees, as a journey. We're all kind of trainees learning things constantly. There is not necessarily a class on how to collaborate with your peers in the same way that you have a class on how to conduct a systematic review. And so this guide is kind of focused on what are the toolings that you can use, as well as we have templates on cold emails that you can send out. We're currently building out the guide for ethical research and the community handbook as well. So within the guide for project design, I like to use this example of, you've just won this big grant, it's fantastic, you're excited, and then you kind of read the implementation steps of all the guidelines for how to actually execute on that. You might refer back to your initial grant application. You kind of get overwhelmed with this, oh my gosh, there's so much to do. So you'd refer to the guide or the section, the chapters on project design to get a bit of an idea of what to get started with. There's the guide for communication, and this is really focused on science communication. So much of very traditional kind of academic literature can be quite dense, and it's often written for other academics as opposed to being focused on being accessible to a wide audience. And if we shift around and we shift towards our writing and our communication being accessible to a wide audience, ultimately a rising tide raises all ships. So we've got some fantastic folk from all around the world who have been contributing to this guide for communications. There are templates for posters, there are templates for paper submissions as well, which is really fantastic. We then have this guide for collaboration, which has been built out so much over the past 2 years, including a group of early career researchers who have really contributed to the section on managing a new community and team, as many of them were promoted into positions where they got their own labs and were guiding and shepherding new younger researchers for the first time. So they built this guide with quick handy tips on how to set up a lab, how do you manage a new growing community and a new team, which has been really, really cool. And then there's also guides and templates for how to host successful remote meetings, as obviously ReproTea has been doing so well, and it's really cool. This other book is about a guide for ethical research, which is at the moment currently made of case studies and expertise from legal departments, as well as institutional review boards or ethics committees, ERCs, who have wanted to contribute to researchers' understanding of the ethical implications of research, and also how to navigate so much of that kind of opaque research ethics process. This final guide that we currently have is what we call the community handbook. Is that what we noticed as this book was expanding and as the community was expanding, and we're preaching about reproducibility, we're preaching about sustainability in terms of software, we also needed to make our resources, and so many of these slides have been cribbed from previous slides and presentations done on the Turing Way, so that there is some consistency both stylistically and tonally across all of the work that we are doing. It also kind of gives some guidelines as to how the community of the Turing Way, now that it has well over 700 contributors, has kind of formed so that it's not quite so intimidating getting started contributing. So there's kind of a little bit about the Turing Way, but the ethos kind of behind it, again, as I mentioned, was around this collaboration for culture change. Instead of working in the silos and research labs where publish or perish, and you're kind of working adversarially against other researchers, how do we build a culture that is about collaboration and moving towards a culture of open science? So we like to say open by design and collaborative in practice. So the idea behind open science and open source is that everyone, depending on the license, can freely read, reuse, distribute, modify, and advance any of the materials that are made available under open licenses. We do this by kind of following a framework that's focused on collaboration, focused on co-production or peer production, and thinking about ultimately what will outlast the individual contributors or the individual contributions. What will the legacy of the project be 10 years from now, when I might no longer be a part of it? And so how can we think about the sustainability of the project? So the way we kind of implement this on the ground in practice is that there are tools, practices, and systems, and you may kind of have a little deja vu because I did mention tools, practices, and systems was one of the programs that I work within at the Alan Turing Institute. And so what I kind of want to highlight is the tools that the Turing Way use, the practices we follow, and the systems, as these are not specific to the Turing Way, but are much more applicable to when we think about communities of practice and implementing a culture change. So the tools that we use is something called open knowledge management. So we document as we learn. So the idea is that instead of having a fully polished final result of 3 months of investigation into a certain tool, or 3 months of investigation into a certain way of working, on GitHub we have this kind of live work and practice documentation. So that way, as one person learns, everyone can learn and jump in and help. And that's kind of a big piece that we do out in the open. So it's not just open at the end result, it's open throughout the process. We really largely focus on community engagement. We don't just necessarily want PIs and head experts of things contributing all of their expertise. It's fantastic, but the idea is that if we learn, if we build a community, we can capture that tacit knowledge as well. We really focus on ensuring that all of the work that is going into something, not just end results, are available for reuse and reading. And so we use Zenodo for storing presentations and any pieces of material, as well as images, and all of the material is licensed either under an MIT for software or a CC BY for kind of content. And that links into this idea of acknowledging all of the contributors, ensuring that people who contribute are given attribution rights and acknowledging the work that our community puts in. We have a strong mentorship pathway, ensuring that it's not just one person kind of playing the role of support, is that we want to support others from giving this presentation. I am currently following the footsteps of many people who have given the Turing Way presentations and talks before, and I can get support from anyone asking about what we think we should include in something, and the same way for any of the chapters. We also have a very strong kind of review system, leaning strongly on the tools that GitHub allows us to have, as well as other resources, so that all of the work that we can do is not just checked by a kind of CI or a test. We are also looking at the correctness of the content, sort of like a Wikipedia in a way. We have a dedicated maintenance team. That's why everyone at Turing within the Tools, Practices and Systems team focuses on the Turing Way as part of their contract time, so that we can support the infrastructure and maintenance. And that's one of my core roles on the Turing Way, so that it's not just localized to the UK. Although we want to support the work in the UK, we are ultimately looking towards a global distributed community, because we are hoping to have an open research community, not one that is just localized to a certain place and time, but one that spans globally and spans an international network. We are focused on building community-driven, so it's not just built for a community, but also by a community, and we have mentorship through in any of the kind of core contributor positions through the Turing Way. The idea, again, isn't just that it's a bunch of closed-door experts. The doors and windows are always open to future contributions, because we are hoping to kind of build this open science community. Because open is not by default, it's not, you know, when something's open, that doesn't necessarily mean it's inclusive, it doesn't mean it's accessible, and it also doesn't mean that something is community-led. There are some fantastic open science projects within kind of neuroscience and psychology, which is my field, which aren't community-based at all, but then there are lots of ones that are. And so when we as kind of leaders trying to advocate and trying to support others getting into this open science field, domain, world, we want to be intentional about how we are designing our resources, and also what resources we are designing, so that people can get involved at any stage of the pipeline, and also so that what we create, the resources and the end results, are accessible to a wide audience. The key kind of pillars behind this culture shift for the Turing Way is that we intentionally design for inclusion. Where possible, we try and simplify processes down, so that either there aren't processes at all if they don't need to be, or they are well documented and easy to follow for a wide audience. We try and ensure that we can foster a sense of ownership, so that people are empowered to drive forward and own certain pieces, so that they can, whether it be a line on a resume if you're applying for a fellowship or a grant, or whether or not you want to give a talk. The idea is that if you are part of the community, you can be a leader within this community. And this final piece is around recognising all contributions within the life sciences, which kind of where my pipeline through the corresponding author and the last author is kind of the most important part on a publication. It's the thing that is given to those of higher status. However, there is so much more work than just someone who signs off on the research at the end of the day. There is the research assistants, you have the people supporting it, you have someone suggesting your idea. I have my partner who's editing all of my papers work, and all of that research could not be done without all of those individual contributions. And so what we do at the Turing Way is we strongly recognise all of those contributions, because everything counts, whether it be a spelling or grammar suggestion, or someone who really is really supportive within the community, because the community could not exist without people fostering, shepherding, and helping the growth and health of that community. There is so much more to collaboration than just sitting there on a Google Doc or on a GitHub pull request and chatting back and forth. So we try and foster this collaboration at the heart of everything. And we have what we call certain pathways for this, whether that is developing resources such as presentations to then share out. There is a lot of maintenance and infrastructure support that needs to go on, and so ensuring that links still work if things change around. Reviewing pull requests are a big part, and then we also have an entire team in a massive Slack group just solely dedicated to translating the Turing Way, and it was the coolest thing to kind of appear in the past year. The idea is that as a community we can collaborate and share best practices. The people, I'll go take a bold stance and say that the people who have contributed to the Turing Way might not have the best experts and may have not the ultimate expertise, the sole truth of knowledge. And so the idea is that if we start with what we know, other people can come in and ultimately share best practices, so that the outcome is that this great piece of work that has expertise from everyone, instead of just saying this is the one right way to do it. It should be a continual learning process. So in terms of supporting the development, there is this kind of idea that not everything is exhausted, not everything is perfect. However, if we continue to build it together, we can get closer to this kind of sole source of truth. We can continue to improve the materials that exist and the materials that will exist. We have certain automations and GitHub bots that recognise all contributions, ensuring that everyone is recognised for their work. And quite often we ask people to write kind of bios if they want to, and ensuring that it is linked to the ORCID ID. And this is all done through kind of the all contributors bot. So this is an example that I really love. Is that you can see this kind of discussion on GitHub that was taking place on a pull request about annotating certain information, so that we had a discussion going on ensuring that kind of there was different pieces of information and there were different reviewers, and so everyone who kind of looked at that, even though they may not have pushed code, they still contributed to the ideas and the theory behind this section of the book. So I can't have just talked about all of the amazing contributors and community without giving thanks and a shout out to all of them. So massive thank you to all of our contributors and users. It's a massive community that this book wouldn't exist as it does without, and we do defer to the all contributors guidelines. As you can see, some people have pens, some people have bugs, some people have books, because it denotes what sort of contribution that they made that we can recognise them for, and it's absolutely fantastic. So in summary, what is the Turing Way? The Turing Way is a book with currently 6 guides. It is a community of contributors working together. It is an open source project built using open source tools and housed on GitHub, and it kind of represents a culture of collaboration. You can find the book kind of at that URL. So if you search the Turing Way directly into a search engine, you can go to the GitHub repository, which is at the Alan Turing Institute's organisation, the Turing Way. You can tweet us. Or you can always email if you have any questions. So that is the Turing Way. And what I thought would be a great kind of discussion point